Hello everyone, welcome to Chetan Bharat Learning and welcome to our series UPSC Mains 2021. This is the second lecture related to environment and disaster management, and like the previous lecture, we'll be discussing 5 questions related to this topic of your Gs3 paper. In today's class, I have taken questions related to climate change. So let us move on to the first question. Corals are known as tropical rainforests of the oceans. Assess the impact of global warming on the coral life systems. So the question basically requires us to elaborate on the impact of global warming on the coral life systems. They have given an introductory sentence in the beginning, and then basically what it wants from us is to assess the impact of global warming on the coral life systems. So, like you know the basic trend of the answer writing, you should give a brief introduction and then move on to the body of the answer and then conclude your answer. So you can start the answer of this question with the introductory line that coral ecosystems, they are the highest biodiversity rich regions in the world, and because of the climate change there have been great reduction in the biodiversity levels in the corals, and as a result of that they have become one of the most threatened ecosystems as well. So then you can make a brief subheading, the impact of global warming on the coral life systems. In this, what all points you can include in your answer? You can say that because of global warming, coral mass bleaching events are increasing in frequency, and as a result of that there are also increasing or more frequent outbreaks of mass disease events, infectious disease outbreaks among the corals. For example, like in 2016 and 17, the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, the most famous coral reef, it had suffered almost 50% reduction of biodiversity because of the infectious disease outbreaks. So that would be a first point, increasing instances of increasing frequency of coral mass bleaching events as the result of climate change, and this in turn contributes to increasing instances of infectious disease outbreaks among the corals. Second point, because of the, now this is related with the first point only, because of the increasing coral mass bleaching events, coral reefs, they have suffered reduced growth rates, the coral organisms and the entire biodiversity, it has suffered reduced growth rates, decreased reproductive capacity, increased susceptibility to diseases, and elevated mortality rates. So like the entire cycle, it affects the biodiversity of the coral ecosystem. Then ocean acidification. Because of the elevated levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it leads to increased absorption of carbon dioxide in the oceanic water, and it is contributing to ocean acidification. Now, what is the impact of ocean acidification in turn on the coral reefs? It reduces their calcification capacity. What are corals? Corals are basically marine organisms that have calcareous exoskeleton. Because of increasing concentration of carbon dioxide or carbonic acid in the oceanic water, it has led to reduced calcification rates. If the exoskeleton of the corals would be weak, then the coral reef building activity that is associated with the corals, that would also suffer. So it affects the calcification rate of the corals, leading to weaker reef building activity. Then next, increasing storms, increasing frequency of storm surges as a result of unpredictable climate behavior. How is this thing affecting the coral reefs? Storms, they produce turbulent conditions in water. And turbulence leads to morbidity of the corals. It blocks the turbulent conditions with extra churning of the sediments. It blocks the mouths of the corals, and ultimately it contributes to coral bleaching. It is an important factor that ultimately leads to coral bleaching. So increasing frequency of storms, cyclones and such extreme events, it induces turbulent conditions in the oceanic waters, which contribute to coral bleaching. And then sea level rise. Global warming is contributing to sea level rise. So how is sea level rise affecting the corals? Corals, they require, first of all, they require sunlight. So there is an appropriate depth from the surface of the ocean in which the corals can survive. So like we can speculate that because of the sea level rise, it may affect corals at the lower levels of the oceans. And there is another way in which sea level rise affects the corals. Some of the corals that are located in the areas adjoining to the land or the continents, the sea level rise, it would lead to increasing sedimentation from the runoff, increasing sedimentation from the runoff from the continental areas, and this in turn would again clog the mouth of the corals, ultimately leading to coral bleaching. So mass bleaching events, ocean acidification, storms, sea level rise, these are the multifarious ways in which global warming is affecting the coral reefs, is affecting the productivity of the coral reefs. In general, the changing precipitation patterns, in the changing pattern of the rainfall, sometimes leading to increased precipitation, sometimes leading to increased runoff from the continental regions. It also leads to coral mass bleaching. So in these multiple ways, the coral bleaching, the coral reefs are being affected by the by the global warming. So in the end, you are supposed to write a conclusion to this answer. What sort of conclusion can you write? Like, what comes to your mind? Limiting, like you have to give a positive conclusion. You can, like in the conclusion, you can write a line which can suggest a possible way out of the problem that is mentioned in the question. Limiting the global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius, below the above the pre-industrial levels. Limiting the local pollution and destructive fishing practices can provide a chance for survival of the coral ecosystems. So the world should come together to achieve these targets so that the highly productive ecosystems are not only preserved but they are also flourishing. So in this way you can conclude this answer. So that I think the first question is clear. Now we'll be moving to the second question. Hanji, the second question is, what do you understand by peri-urban agriculture? In what way can it aid addressing the effects of climate change? Discuss. So the key part of the question was understanding what is being asked in the question, and the key term over here is peri-urban. Like if you have not heard of this term, then the question may sound very difficult to you, but otherwise if you are aware of the meaning of this term, then the question would be an easy question for you, even if you have not earlier practiced writing this answer. Peri-urban, what is peri-urban? Which is on the periphery of the urban areas. So the agriculture, what would be peri-urban agriculture? The agriculture that is practiced on the fringes of the urban area, on the boundaries of the urban areas, on the periphery of the urban areas. That is the peri-urban agriculture. It may include crop cultivation in the peripheral areas. It may include livestock raising in the peripheral areas. It may include fisheries. It may include urban forestry or such like things. So the agriculture that is practiced on the peripheral areas, on the fringes of the urban areas, that is known as peri-urban agriculture. Now think of the ways in which it can address the effects of climate change. So you'll make you'll write the definition that we have discussed, and then you'll make a heading, affects how the peri-urban agriculture affects the helps in reducing the effects of the climate change. What all points come to your mind? The very obvious effect would be green zones, creation of green zones around the urban spaces. So if we'll be practicing agriculture, let's say practicing social forestry as well, then it would create green zones around the urban areas. Second, green, like with all the associated benefits of afforestation that you are very well aware of. Second important thing, like again related to your first point, it would reduce the impact of the urban heat island effect. We know that urban areas invariably they have relatively higher temperature as compared to the surrounding hinterland. So if we'll be practicing peri-urban agriculture, this would reduce this effect. This would reduce this phenomena of urban heat island. The intensity would be reduced. Third would be, otherwise, let's say we are not practicing peri-urban agriculture, but the urban population, it needs to consume some fresh fruits, vegetables, and they are usually transported from faraway places, if not from the fringes of the urban areas. It increases the transportation costs. It leads to greater carbon dioxide emissions from the vehicular transportation. It also leads to greater energy needs because of the need for cold storage. If the agriculture is being practiced in the peripheral areas, to whatever extent it is practiced, it would lead to lower transportation needs, lower need for cold storages and such like things. And the urban customers, they can be provided fresh fruits and vegetables, and if particularly if the horticultural crops are being raised. So it would lower the need for transportation with all its energy benefits. What else? Diversification of the food basket. Diversification of the food basket. Now, like whatever diverse crops that are being grown, whatever, let's say, exotic fruits or vegetables, they can be grown in the peri-urban areas, that would lead to diversification of the food basket, and that would reduce the impact on the traditional cropping systems. Restrict, like next point would be, let me just clear it. Next point would be, it would restrict unplanned urbanization. It would restrict unplanned urbanization. Unplanned urbanization has its own toll on the environment, and it leads to increased emissions, it leads to increased congestion, leads to increased emissions also. The carbon footprint of the unplanned urbanization vis-a-vis the planned urbanization, that's also more. So if we have well-developed peri-urban agricultural tracts, then it would restrict unplanned urbanization. So in these ways, peri-urban agriculture can help mitigate the effects of climate change. But for this to for peri-urban agriculture to flourish, now like I have discussed all the points, the main points that you can include in your answer. How would you write a conclusion to this answer? Peri-urban agriculture, climate change. We need to adopt such practices which would promote peri-urban agriculture in the peripheral areas of the city. For that, we need to recognize the contracts so that the farmers, they can be induced to adopt these practices which will have the positive effect on the climate change as well. So that's how you can write an answer to this question. Of course, you can modify whatever we are discussing according to your own writing style. You can add additional points as well, but like a basic framework of the answer should be like something like this. So we'll be moving to the next question now. The impact of climate change falls disproportionately on the poor. Analyze and also highlight India's risk profile due to climate change. So there are two parts of the question. First, we have to analyze in what all ways the impact of climate change falls disproportionately on the poor. And in the second part of the question, they have asked us to highlight India's risk profile due to climate change. As far as the impact on the poor is concerned, you can start with a basic introductory line like climate change is a global problem, but it has been seen that its impact falls disproportionately on the poor, and then you can straight on move on to the points. Like why I'm saying this, that you should only mention a brief introductory line in this question, because there is too much content to write, and probably you'll fall short of the space. So with a brief introductory line, you straight on move on to the answer. Like you can divide this impact on the poor into different categories. Agricultural productivity. Agriculture is the basic primary occupation of most of the people in the world. So climate change, because of the global warming, the agricultural productivity gets reduced, and it leads to drought-like conditions, which further in turn leads to food shortages. And directly also, the people who are dependent on agriculture as an economic activity, their livelihood gets threatened. So that's the first point. The second point would be food shortages. Now that's related with your first point only. Food shortages leading to hunger and malnutrition. The direct impact of the decreasing agricultural productivity would be that it would lead to food shortages, and like now this food shortages may not impact just the farmers only, but the lower sections of the society the most. That would lead to hunger and malnutrition. Further, there is another effect associated with these food shortages. In the regions with scarce resources, like we are specifically discussing the impact on the poorer regions or the poorer sections of the society. In the regions with these scarce resources, the food shortages may in turn lead to intensification of the conflicts, intensification of the existing conflicts, and it may also have the tendency to generate new conflicts. Now, who would access the meager resources left? So it may lead to such conflicts. For example, in Democratic Republic of Congo, there have been instances of tribes fighting with each other for the meager resources that are available. So such conflicts may get exacerbated because of the climate change. And then the third point that you can mention over here is, because of food shortages, because of let's say lesser availability of food, lesser availability of water, lesser availability of jobs and other economic resources, it may lead to people migrating to other regions. So it will generate a refugee problem. Throughout the world, we can find climate refugees, the people who have been displaced because of the climatic conditions. Maybe like we have the examples of people displaced due to hurricanes in Puerto Rico, because of desertification of the Lake Chad region in Africa. So there are multiple instances in the world where people have started migrating. They have been forced to migrate because of the climatic reasons, climate refugees. So this in turn would have problem not only for the people who are migrating, but it also has the tendency to generate conflicts in the host regions, because the regions where these people will migrate to, now that would lead to increased concentration of people and increased competition for the meager resources available in that region as well. So this is yet another way in which climate change has its impact on the poor. So these are the multiple ways in which like climate change affects poor. Like the impact falls disproportionately on the poor, because even if like let's say the climatic phenomena, it does not discriminate between the rich and the poor, but the rich have more resources to make themselves better. On the other hand, the poor, they are left to bear the brunt of the changes, whatever effect that climate change may produce on that particular region. Now coming on to the second part of the question, highlight India's risk profile due to climate change. So what all things come to your mind, like in what way you can address this part of the question, India's risk profile due to climate change? Like what all things may happen and how those things may affect India. Like let's start with a very basic point. Like India, like you can give a brief introduction again. India ranks 5th globally for the losses it has suffered due to climate change. The multiple ways in which India is affected by climate change includes, let's say you can again divide this thing into points. Agriculture. More than 50% of our population, more than 50% of our agriculture is rain-fed agriculture. Climate change may result in erratic rainfall patterns leading to increased instances of droughts as well as floods, which may have effect on the livelihood of the people who are dependent on agriculture. Now this is your first point. Next would be because of sea level rise. Because of sea level rise on account of global warming, the coastal cities of India, they are subject to increased flooding events, increased storm surges, and increased sea ingress events, or which leads to increased salinity of the groundwater. So sea level rise has its own toll on the coastal regions of India. So coastal regions of India, they are affected by this thing. Third would be because of erratic rainfall in the Himalayan regions, there have been increased instances of events such as cloudburst, leading to frequent flooding of the Himalayan states. For example, you can give the examples of 2014 Uttarakhand floods. So the third point would be increased instances of cloudbursts. Then the next point would be the increased melting of glaciers because of climate change. The climate change, it is leading to increased melting of glaciers. So many of the glaciers, including the Gangotri glacier, they are fast receding. It has significant impact on the river regimes and the river flows. There are increasing instances of rivers Himalayan rivers significantly drying up during the winter season. So climate change is gonna exacerbate this impact. There further, like the fifth point you can write over here is increasing instances of severe heat strokes. Increasing instances of severe heat stroke. That's also one of the impact of climate change, and in the northern regions of the country, it is being witnessed that there are increasing instances leading to the death of the individuals as well. So these are the multiple ways in which like different regions of India are impacted by the climate change, impacted by the different dimensions of the climate change. So this is how you can address this question. Now we'll be moving to the next question. Now, discussing the reasons behind the disappearance of springs, examine how Springshed management can help revive springs, especially in the Himalayan region. Now, two parts of the question: reasons behind the disappearance of these springs and the role of Springshed management in reviving the springs, especially in the Himalayan regions. So you can start this answer with giving a basic definition of the spring. Spring is the region where the water, groundwater naturally comes to the surface, and people can use this water. You can, and this definition over here is the region where the groundwater naturally comes up to the surface. Historically and like even presently, springs are used by the local communities for their drinking needs, for their agricultural needs and other domestic needs. Despite the role that they play in the local economy, especially in the hilly regions, the springs are neglected. The springs, they have not been able to get their due attention. And as a recent government report found out, that almost 60% of the Himalayan springs, they are either dried up, they have become critical, or they have become completely seasonal. So we need to focus more on preserving these springs. But first of all, let us discuss the reasons responsible for the disappearance of the springs. What all reasons come to your mind? Like why why the springs are disappearing? Why they are turning into seasonal springs, or they are becoming critical, or they are not giving water during the entire year? First would be increasing demand. Increasing demand pressures on those springs. As the population increases, more and more people are dependent on their water needs from those springs, and that capacity, the capacity of the spring may not be sufficient to satisfy the demands of the increasing population. So first would be the increased demand. Then would be changing land use patterns. Changing land use patterns, which would include, let's say, infrastructural development also. So whenever large-scale infrastructure projects are being carried out in such regions, it leads to, let's say, increased paved area, increased use of concrete. So that leads to lesser percolation of water. That leads to lesser percolation of water, in turn leading to low amount of recharging of the springs. The third would be ecological degradation. Including soil erosion or instances like deforestation. Now, what all these things lead to? Deforestation. It would deforestation helps the soil particles bind together, and it also leads to increased percolation of water to groundwater. So, in the because of deforestation, lesser water gets percolated. That again leads to lesser recharge of the source regions for these springs. Next would be climate change. Climate change, it is leading to erratic rainfall, erratic patterns of rainfall. Sometimes there is lesser rainfall, sometimes the rainfall is more intense, but it's not as spatially spread. So it leads to lesser recharge of the groundwater, which contributes to drying up of springs. So these are the reasons behind disappearance of the springs, especially in the Himalayan regions. Now moving on to the second part of your answer. Springshed management. Springshed management in role of springshed management in reviving the springs. First of all, what is springshed? Even if you have not heard this term earlier and you encounter such a term in the exam, you have to try to relate a particular term with the concept that you might have already covered in your preparation. Does this term look similar to watershed? Watershed development. I'm sure you have already covered watershed development at least. So this springshed development is similar to watershed development, but you have to apply those concepts in context of a spring. So what is a springshed? Springshed is a particular region which acts as a source region for collecting rainfall that ultimately contributes to the water of the spring. So that's like catchment area of a spring, a micro level catchment area of a spring, the entire region that receives the rainfall and ultimately contributes to the water of the spring. That's a springshed. So The question was, in what all ways the Springshed management can help in reviving springs, especially in the Himalayan region. So the Springshed management would involve all sort of activities leading to recharge of the springs, and these activities may range from hydrology to governance of the natural resources. We may have certain hydrological solutions, we may have certain engineering solutions, that these embankments may be constructed, the water may be channelized or such like things. We may have certain engineering solutions or hydrological solutions, and then we may also have certain solutions which fall in the category of governance of the natural resources. Whatever existing springs are there, whatever existing channels are there, how we can effectively manage those resources so that the springs don't get disappear, the springs, they don't dry up. And that may involve conducting scientific tests, regarding the depth of groundwater table. It may involve scientific mapping of the springs. We don't have any such official data regarding how many springs are there in a particular region. So GIS techniques may be used for a systematic mapping of the springs in a particular region. Then it may involve taking up appropriate engineering solutions, as I mentioned earlier. Further, Springshed management also involves addressing demand size challenges by addressing the issue of water use, because it is the people ultimately who are using the water of the spring. So how can we address the demand side challenges? We can run awareness campaign on a Springshed level. Springshed, it is believed that it is the ideal level for conservation of for preservation of the natural resources related to spring. So if the people who are dependent on the water of a particular spring, they should be educated about the optimum use of that water and what techniques they can adopt to increase the water availability from that particular spring. The capacity building of the people, appropriate training of the local people, linking the livelihood of the local communities with the interventions related to revival of the springs. What do you mean by that? Let's say you have programs like MG Narega. The people who are getting employment as a result of such initiatives, they should be like involved in the local people of that particular region. They should be involved in let's say working or creating the initiatives for the conservation of those springs. So it would create a healthy relationship. People would be involved in conserving the springs, and they would also reap the benefits of conserving those springs. Then we can have these programs like a Dhara Vikas program by Sikkim government. This particular program, it is aimed at Springshed development within the state of Sikkim, and you can conclude your answer by saying that more such programs like Dhara Vikas program by Sikkim government, they needs to be encouraged among the other Himalayan states as well. So in this way you can write an answer to this question, which brings us to the last question for the day. That is, Montreal Protocol is often considered as the most successful international environmental treaty, highlighting the achievements of the protocol. Discuss the reasons for its success. You can start this answer with a brief introduction about the Montreal Protocol, that it is an international treaty signed in Montreal, Canada in September 1987 that aimed to limit the use and production of chemicals that result in depletion of the ozone layer. Vienna Convention took place, and as a result of that, as a consequence to the Vienna Convention, Montreal Protocol was signed in September 1987 to limit the use of ODS, ozone depleting substances. Now, what we are supposed to do, we are supposed to highlight the achievements of the protocol, and we have to discuss the reasons for its success. As far as the achievements of the protocol are concerned, it has like UN Secretary General, ex-UN Secretary General Kofi Annan had said way back in 2000 around somewhere around 2005 that it is the most successful climate agreement, international agreement on climate till date. Why? Because countries have been working on whatever is mentioned in the Montreal Protocol, whatever reduction targets were set in the Montreal Protocol, and those things have also started showing their effect. For example, it has led to decreased atmospheric abundances of ODS, ozone depleting substances. Decreased atmospheric abundances of ozone depleting substances. For example, total tropospheric chlorine, total tropospheric bromine, they have remarkably, their concentrations have remarkably reduced from their historic levels as a result of implementation of the Montreal Protocol. Outside, what's the effect on ozone layer? As far as the impact on the ozone layer is concerned, you can mention a twofold effect. Outside of the polar regions, the ozone layer has recovered at the rate of approximately 1 to 3% since 2000. So, impact outside of the polar regions and impact within the polar regions. Because you see that the problem of ozone hole, it is more acute in the polar regions, particularly over Antarctica continent. So outside of the polar regions, it has led to recovery of the ozone layer at the rate of about 1 to 3% since 2000, and within the polar regions also, even though it has not led to as such much recovery, but the rate at which the ozone layer is getting depleted, it has reduced. And if we go on implementing the provisions of the Montreal Protocol, the ozone layer would be restored to its pre-1980 level. The ozone layer would be restored to its pre-1980 level by 2050 to 2075. So within the measurable time span, we'll be able to restore the ozone layer back to the pre-1980 position. Moreover, there is another way in which the Montreal Protocol has been very successful. Ozone depleting substances, they also, many of the ozone depleting substances, they also contribute to greenhouse effect. They also contribute to global warming, and because the production of ozone depleting substances is checked under the Montreal Protocol, it has also resulted in checking global warming to a certain extent. A recent study, it has found out that approximately 25 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of the greenhouse emissions have been saved as a result of Montreal Protocol. Then the health benefits. Because of the implementation of Montreal Protocol, which basically came into existence to restore the ozone layer back to its original position, the instances there have, it has also been calculated that there have been lesser instances of skin cancer or diseases like eye cataracts. So these are the health benefits of the Montreal Protocol. So you can list all these achievements of Montreal Protocol in your answer. Now moving to the second part of your answer, reasons for its success. Why Montreal Protocol has been that successful and the other environmental treaties not that successful as Montreal Protocol. Now, there are certain empirical reasons, and the way the treaty is designed, they are responsible for its success. For example, it is one of the few treaties which is truly global in participation. more than 190 countries as well as the European Union, they have ratified, they have not only signed but they have also ratified the Montreal Protocol. So there is global participation, global effort at controlling the production of the ozone depleting substances and gradually phasing out of the harmful of these ODS. Then the approach, participatory approach. Most of the negotiations that took place during the signing of the Montreal Protocol, the discussions that took place, they took place in small informal groups rather than let's have a very large meeting where all the stakeholders are invited and much discussion takes place and no consensus is reached and then lesser things gets implemented. So like instead of that approach, in 1980s when the Vienna Convention took place and the discussions on the Montreal Protocol were taking place, many of the discussions they took place in small informal groups. So there could be meaningful discussions between the credible stakeholders and the data could be co-opted to actually agree to points, and the countries then worked to achieve those targets that were set in the Montreal Protocol. Then certain principles that were incorporated within the Montreal Protocol, they have also resulted in success of the protocol. For example, the precautionary principle. And the famous CBDR that you are very well aware of. Common but differentiated responsibility principle, precautionary principle. What's this precautionary principle? Now you see you have to keep in mind the time frame we are talking, 1980s. The impact of ozone depleting substances had been brought to the light of the world, but not enough research had taken place by then to arrive at the exact facts and figures. So there was sufficient research that was available to point to the fact that there are certain substances which are affecting the ozone layer concentration and an ozone hole which is developing over Antarctica, but facts and figures that could actually point out the relationship and also discuss the exact extent to which a particular substance is responsible, they were not available back then. Even then, they adopted this principle, precautionary principle. The absence of credible data, the absence of exact researched data, that should not hinder parties from taking appropriate steps to control a condition which may have an implication for the larger society. So without data also, it compelled the parties to take appropriate action to control the level of the ozone depleting substances. CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities. The developing countries, they were given a longer time frame to phase out the ODS, whereas the developed countries, they were given the lesser time frame to phase out the ODS ozone depleting substances. Yet another reason is flexibility to incorporate new information. Now it sprang from this point only, because sufficient data was not available back then. So there was this term within the Montreal Protocol that as new research would come into, would bring new data into light, sufficient adjustments can be done to the Montreal Protocol targets that were set in the Montreal Protocol. For example, we have example in front of us, among the many examples, one of the examples could be Kigali Agreement 2016. It added HFCs also to the list of the ODS which have to be phased out gradually. Earlier we had CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, then we had HCFCs, and lastly in the Kigali Agreement in 2016, we added HFCs also, hydrofluorocarbons also, to the list of the substances, ozone depleting substances that have eventually to be phased out. So as the new research points out new data and new innovations results in let's say developing new products, so the older products or the products which are harmful, they also get added to the list. So there was flexibility. to incorporate new information. Then trade provisions. The Montreal Protocol had provisions which restricted the trade of ODS, ozone depleting substances, with the countries that had not ratified the Montreal Protocol. So it was very difficult for that country which has not signed the protocol, which has not ratified the protocol, to procure the ozone depleting substances if it is actually not manufacturing those. So different countries, they were compelled, kind of like positively compelled by this in this manner, to ratify the Montreal Protocol, and in this way they were brought in the ambit of the Montreal Protocol, and those countries then worked to eliminate the use of the ozone depleting substances. Yet another point was the clear demarcation of sectors and chemicals. What all sectors are to be targeted, what all chemicals are to be targeted, what is the precise time frame in which different chemicals are to be phased out. Such things were very explicitly mentioned in the Montreal Protocol, and that also let's say directed the actions of the government, that also acted as a guide to the governments what all sectors that domestically, what all sectors they can target, what all industries they can target, what all chemicals or the products they can target, and so that the Montreal Protocol targets are achieved. So these are the reasons for the success of the Montreal Protocol, and that's why, because these points are usually missing, are not available in toto in other climate agreements. So Montreal Protocol has, like I said earlier, that Kofi Annan, the ex-Secretary General of UN, he had said that it is one of the most successful international treaties till date. So in this way you can conclude and write an answer to this question. So that concludes our second session related to environment and disaster management. I'll see you tomorrow with the third session, in which we'll be discussing ecology and biodiversity related questions. So that's all as far as this session was concerned. Thank you from my side.